On This Week in Enterprise Tech, HP printers get owned, Microsoft drops a stack, and IPv6. Twice on the set.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for This Week in Enterprise Tech is provided by CacheFly at CacheFly.com.
This is Twit. This Week in Enterprise Tech, episode 174, recorded January 29th, 2016. IPv6 Ready with Brandon Ross. This Week in Enterprise Tech is brought to you by Citrix GoToWebinar. Connect and convert qualified leads with GoToWebinar, the leading platform for engaging online events. For a 30-day free trial, visit gotowebinar.com today. And by IT Pro TV. Upgrade your brain for 2016. IT Pro TV is the resource to keep your IT skills up to date with engaging and informative video tutorials. For a free 7-day trial and 30% off the life of your account, go to itpro.tv/enterprise and use the code ENTERPRISE30. Welcome to Twit. This Week in Enterprise Tech, it's the show dedicated to the enterprise professional, the IT pro, and the geek who just wants to know how the world is connected. I'm your host, Father Robert Ballecer, the digital Jesuit, your guide to all things in the enterprise. But I'm not guiding you by myself. I've got two of my regular co-hosts, starting with Mr. Curtis Franklin. He is at Information Week Radio. He is the voice of reason, the voice that you trust, the voice of the Curtis. Curtis, how are things on the right coast? It's a little rainy here in California.
It is a beautiful day here in Florida, mid-60s, bright blue skies, a lovely break from the winter weather we've had. Indeed, indeed. And actually, the two of us will be conquering Orlando at some point in the very near future. After I get back from Barcelona for Mobile World Congress, we're going to be covering Enterprise Connect. We may have some special treats in store for the Twilight Riot, so you got to stay tabbed to that. Now, Cheebert was supposed to be with us because we do a little rotation here with the co-host, but unfortunately, he does have the plague. So instead of Cheebert, we're taking his spot most admirably is a man who we all know, we all love. It's Mr. Lou Maresca. He is a lead development expert over at Microsoft Corp. Lou, you know, thank you for stepping in, but I got to say, no matter where you come, I love to chat with you. How are things over in Redmond?
I'm doing great. Poor Cheebert. You know, I had the sick last week, and I feel for him. But yeah, it's over here is 47 degrees and rainy. It's normal for this time of year. So, but we're all happy. We're going to talk about a little bit of Azure today. So I'm happy.
Yes, yes. Now, yeah, I think that sickness is kind of getting around. I see a lot of people with sniffles and with runny noses, but nothing cures illness like a little bit of tech. So let's go ahead and kick it off with the blips. Now, this comes from a member of the Twilight Riot. Josh Fry pointed out that there's a story about a vulnerability made by Chris Vickery, who is the researcher of databases and security issues. Now, he brought it to the attention of the internet. Specifically, if you're a user of an internet-connected, hard drive-equipped HP LaserJet printer, then you are hosting an anonymous FTP server. Vickery explained that port 9100, which HP uses as the default printing port for their network-attached printers, can be exploited for remote execution of arbitrary code. Using any number of freely available activities, an attacker can own any integrated hard drive, essentially turning your enterprise-class network printer into an anonymous FTP server without otherwise affecting the function of the printer. A cursory scan of port 9100 across the internet turns up thousands, if not tens of thousands, of unprotected HP printers, all of which could be used to host malicious websites, serve as wares drops, and otherwise be a bonanza for the seedy side of the internet. However, for us IT wonks who are accustomed to treating our HP printing gear with kid gloves, this story is even more interesting because the vulnerability that he describes was discovered 5 years ago. CVE 2011-4161. Bottom line, if you have an HP printer on your network, it's time to put it behind a firewall.
VMware slices and narrows the cloud. VMware announced Tuesday that it is slashing approximately 800 positions as it moves to narrow the focus of its vCloud Air business. VMware, which we must admit was late to the cloud party, is making this move on top of its December cloud retrenchment when it canceled plan to run EMC's VirtuStream cloud business. According to VMware CEO Pat Gelsinger, VMware is creating cloud software and cloud services for cloud providers. The upshot is that VMware has decided that competing with Amazon, Google, and IBM in the big public cloud arena is a battle it just can't afford to fight.
It looks like Xerox is going to split into two companies now that Carl Icahn holds 3 board seats. One will be the hardware side, and the other which when we come to know, is the other side is going to be concentrating on services. So you might not be aware, but in many cities, Xerox Field Service is already handling PC, server, and printer enterprise repairs for monsters like HP, IBM, and Dell. The subcontracting is much wider spread than you might think, and Xerox's new service-centric side is looking to capture more of this kind of piece of the pie.
Microsoft wants to spy on you, and I think most of you will be willing to let it. Microsoft's Cortana, the personal digital assistant named after the hyper-intelligent, formerly heroic, now quite rampant artificial intelligence from their Halo video game universe, already looks through your digital data in order to remind you of your flights. Now, Microsoft is enabling a feature called Commitments that will scan your email for things that you've promised or agreed to do. Based on the commitments that Cortana finds in your emails, she'll create a card to check them against your existing commitments and remind you of their pending deadlines. For example, if you have an email exchange with your work superior and she tells you that you need to meet to discuss a project on Tuesday, Cortana will compare your response against your calendar, warning you of travel schedule, commute times, and personal preference. In other words, Microsoft wants Cortana to be less Siri or Google Now and more like Jarvis from Iron Man. Stay tapped for Windows 11 and its digital hero, Vision.
Remember Google Glass? It's back for the enterprise. Google seems to have well and truly killed the consumer effort of Google Glass, but the enterprise efforts for Glass seem to be expanding. Last month, for example, Google filed documents with the FCC in which it revealed new drawings for Google Glass 2. The filing bolstered a Wall Street Journal report that Google was having healthcare, manufacturing, and energy-related companies test out a new and improved version of Google Glass. Now, there are 10 certified partners listed on the Google Glass at Work page, which shows some of the ways these organizations are using Glass in their products and services. As the enterprise Glass hardware and software offerings proliferate, Google may eventually be able to lower the price on the devices to make them more affordable for consumers, giving consumers another reason to consider buying the devices.
Tom Wheeler is telling the cable companies they're charging too much for their set-top boxes. If you ever tried to build your own media box before, you know the pain of trying to get copyright protect content onto those third-party devices. You need cable cards and adapters, and they're insanely priced and very expensive and kind of sometimes hard to get. So what the FCC chairman is saying is that the standards need to be more open and that there's a monopoly for boxes, for changing boxes. He draws an analogy of how cable box prices have risen almost 185%, while computer prices have dropped 90%. What these proposed cable box rules change hearings on February 18th could do is make all the cable bills a bit more affordable and perhaps finally start seeing some nice third-party cable interfaces become available in this otherwise closed market.
Now, since its founding 5 years ago, Bay Area-based Big Switch Networks has made a name for itself as an innovative purveyor of software-defined networking solutions. From their Switchlight OS, which gives us a foundation for bare metal SDN in the Open Compute project, to the Big Cloud products, which turn policies into switch flows across enterprise networks. Big Switch has used their $94 million in funding to create much sought-after software that has led to millions in contracts. Now, with 300% annual growth and several big-name deals, Big Switch is taking the gamble that their investment will bring even bigger returns by giving away their software. Big Switch will be offering a community edition of their Big Monitoring and Big Cloud Fabric solutions that can be downloaded and used for free in lab and development environments. Their intention is to push IT folk to experiment with open networking gear, seeding the ecosystem with their version of SDN, and promoting hardware and software disaggregation, which is a nice way of saying you choose your switch vendor and then you choose your Switch OS. If it works, Big Switch will be in direct competition with the completely undisaggregated, yeah, it's not a word, but I just made it, Cisco application infrastructure products, and the winner will be us. Well, folks, that does it for the blips. We're going to go ahead and jump into the bites next. But first, let's go ahead and thank the first sponsor of this episode of This Week in Enterprise Tech. And hold up a bit, because I want to have a conversation with those of you who are responsible for getting the word out about your company, about your services and your products. Now, I know that it can be challenging in this day and age to hold attention, to have a good event, to have a good meeting when attention is being drawn everywhere else. There are so many different ways to come at a potential customer and so many different forums that you can use. It can be daunting to find the right way to reach your target audience and generate real leads for your sales team without blowing the bank, which is why we're happy to have Citrix GoToWebinar as a supporter of the Twilight Riot. Now, GoToWebinar lets you present to hundreds of potential clients with confidence, letting you connect, captivate, and convert your target audience in one go. Now, here's how it works. You pick a topic, you select your audience, and you schedule your events. That's it. GoToWebinar does everything else in the background with automated emails, custom branding, and practice sections. Speaking of practice sessions, that's one of the best ideas that they had for remote presentations ever. If you've ever tried using unified communications to present to multiple endpoints, you know the buzzkill that is tech support during a presentation. Nothing kills a pitch like having an hour of tech issues before you go. But with GoToWebinar, your audience can test ahead of time so that they're ready when the time comes to be concerned about nothing else but you and your company. Of course, it doesn't stop with prepping your audience for the presentation. During the event, GoToWebinar will keep your audience engaged with interactive polls, live chat, and real-time feedback. And once the event is over, you can get one-click registration attendance and performance metrics. How's that for numbers? Basically, GoToWebinar enables marketers like you to easily reach your target audience and turn leads into customers. So here's what we want you to do. If you are involved with the marketing side of IT, if you are looking for a better way to present, get started with GoToWebinar today and connect to convert. That's gotowebinar.com and start your free 30-day trial. Again, gotowebinar.com for your free 30-day trial. And we thank GoToWebinar for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Let's go ahead and jump into the bite because we've got a doozy. This is actually a big week for people who deal with clouds, with virtualization, and with moving their infrastructure on and off of premise. I want to bring Lou in here because Lou, of course, you are our connection inside of Microsoft. Microsoft made a big announcement about Azure Stack. Now, first of all, what is Azure Stack? It was hinted at about a year ago. Now we're actually starting to see it roll out into a test program. What is it? What does it do?
So, Azure Stack's model is kind of what they call build once, deploy anywhere. And it essentially kind of brings the power of Azure's public cloud services to your on-prem and that whole phase of making your app cloud ready. So like, what does that really mean? So it means kind of taking your, when you build an app, you can either take the traditional app side of things where you can build an app using infrastructure as a service or IaaS model, which virtual machines or what like normal lab applications or line of business applications use today, or using PaaS services, a platform as a service, like blob storage and Service Fabric, and allowing you to build your more cloud native app, and it allows you to both deploy both your app on either Azure Cloud Services, which is the public, or on to the on-premise, and so it kind of gives you the ability to either do one or the other.
Curtis, there are going to be people out there who are going to say, wait a minute, don't we already have this? Why is this a big announcement from Microsoft? Can't I already do this with any cloud platform? Why is this a significant development?
Well, I think that the big development here is that it dramatically spreads the idea of what you can move around. The notion before was that you could make one-way trips. There are all kinds of cloud service providers that give you the tools to take, say, an on-premise application and move it to the cloud. What Microsoft is promising here is that you can really take advantage of the dynamic promise of the cloud and move loads around, whether it be on-premise to the cloud, cloud to on-premise, back and forth, as your needs require. And that's really the revolutionary part of something like this.
Yeah, indeed. In fact, it's been pointed out that a lot of people were used to the promise of the cloud being able to take what you have on premise and then push it up. This is a role reversal. People have gotten used to the power of the cloud, and this is Microsoft saying, hey, we're going to let you take that power and bring it on premise, which, believe it or not, is a fantastic solution. In fact, That's something that was that we see from VMware. VMware, remember, they haven't had a good go the last couple of months. In fact, the last year has been a really, really tough year. 2015 was not a great year for VMware. They've just laid off 8,000 workers, or 800. They've laid off a lot of workers. They're seeing a lot of stagnation inside of the product line. But their new NSX strategy, and the one that actually shows some light for the company that's building up revenue, is this idea of giving yourself a hybrid deployment of services and apps, being able to do on-premise and in the cloud that's platform agnostic as easily as it is to deploy on a server that you have your hand on. Now, Lou, what does this mean for the typical Azure customer? Who is going to want to move on-premise?
So, I mean, it kind of combines both things, right? It combines the people who are kind of on-premise today and they want to build these really kind of cloud-ready applications that at some point they want to take those applications and then move them directly to, instead of hosting them on their on-premise infrastructure, having to manage all that and pay for all that, they want to move it to more of the cloud-based infrastructure, making it more elastic and so on and so forth. So it gives that ability that you can rapidly build an application, let the IT pro manage it, let the developer go in and implement services and applications in the Azure stack, and then when it's time to kind of move out, they can do that. And then there's of course the other side of things where it allows you as a developer, if you've built a cloud application but you want to bring that down, whether it's using IaaS or PaaS, you want to bring that down to more of an on-premise setting. Maybe you have a bank that wants it more private. Then you can do that. You can take what you have, exactly the same code, exactly the same template that you've used in the cloud, and you can just dump it right on your on-premise infrastructure, and bam, it should start working. And you get the same experience managing it there than you did in the public cloud.
Curtis, I want to ask you about this. There are those who will say that we're seeing this movement from cloud providers because of the challenge that is containers. Containers they tend to be eating a lot of the virtualization company's lunch. In fact, that's one of the reasons why VMware had such a bad 2015. And now we're seeing that mobility within containers that cloud providers like AWS, like Google Compute, like Microsoft Azure need to emulate. They need to at least provide as much mobility, as much flexibility as you get from a container that has much more generous licensing options. What's your take on that?
Well, I think that you hit on something that's key right there at the end, and that's the licensing, and that's really the piece that's driving a lot of this. We've talked about in the past things like Oracle and its history of being very aggressive in its conversations with customers around licensing, and licensing drives more of these decisions than we would like to think. Here at Twyat and throughout the IT world, we tend to focus on the technology and what's possible there. The simple expedience of licensing drive, I would say, almost as much of the strategy as technology does, because the dollar amounts that go into managing those licenses is huge. Now, having said that, the other key piece is that flexibility that containers have introduced into the mix. The cloud service providers have spent years now telling everyone how wonderful it is that once you move a load into the cloud, it becomes very flexible. You can spin up new instances, tear them down, move loads around at will, and in many cases under automated control. What has happened now is that through containers, customers are getting the idea that they can do that not only within a cloud, but between clouds and between clouds and on-premise infrastructure. And the cloud service providers, having brought about this idea of flexibility, now are becoming uncomfortable with just how flexible customers want to be. Between licensing and flexibility, it's going to be very interesting to see what customers force the service providers to do.
The licensing question. It's always a biggie anytime we talk about moving services around. Now, Lou, let me go back to you really quickly. Let's jump back into the heart of Azure Stack. It's a big announcement, But products like this have been announced in the past. They have existed. I'm thinking of things like OpenStack, Cloud Foundry. HP had, I think it was Eucalyptus. Those products never really took off. In fact, several of them have died. They've just been killed in the crib. So what's going to make OpenStack succeed? I mean, Azure Stack succeed, whereas those others failed.
So it's a little easier to bootstrap. So like, for instance, you talked about OpenStack, and the concept with OpenStack means that you have to build your application on-prem using OpenStack, and then you try to kind of migrate that to whether you want to go migrate it to Azure or AWS, and you find that it's really tough for you to integrate your application to that type of service, because that means that that cloud service also has to be built on top of OpenStack, and you'll find that there's very limited resources and set of vendors that kind of support that today. So that's kind of killing OpenStack almost in that sense. And then you talked about Eucalyptus. HP kind of bought that and then just kind of faded to black. So I think these types of services are kind of not really building themselves out in a sense, but that's where OpenStack comes in. Azure Stack comes in. And that means that because it kind of was birthed as Azure Cloud Services, and now it's just bringing it down to the on-prem, which means you already have the ability, you already have a place or space to go. If you did want to make it an elastic cloud service, you just take it right back to Azure. Or you can, like I said, bring it down to the on-prem. So I think it seems like it almost will be more successful, because if people are building small microservices or big applications on Azure today already, and then they just want to bring it on-prem, it makes it that much easier.
Okay, now if I was a client and I'm thinking about moving to Azure Stack, because I like the idea of having hybrid. I want public-private. What do I get? So what are the tools that are provided for me? How will I develop? I know it's in a beta period right now. If I wanted to sign up for the beta, what kind of support do I get from Microsoft?
Sure. So there's a bunch of services. I mean, there's what they call user-facing services, and they have what they call their standard portal, which is, if you ever used Azure before, you have the ability to go in and provision a bunch of different types of services, whether it's PaaS services such as storage or networking or cloud computing, that kind of thing. And then you can kind of do that in the portal itself. But it also includes things for like IT Pro and DevOps. Like, for instance, for DevOps, it gives them the ability to use PowerShell, parameterized PowerShell templates to kind of be able to access and manage their services. But it also includes something called what we call the all-powerful Oz, which is the Azure Resource Manager. And what that is it's kind of a control plane for the Azure cloud. It gives you the template models for composing applications, which could potentially contain multiple tiers and scripting and different other applications that it integrates with. And which actually includes traditional apps that are built on, infrastructure such as, even Linux and so on. And it provides ways to model those things out, such as networking and storage and compute requirements and resources. And it also can manage your application's lifecycle, which is meaning it can not just do the standard start-stop of the application, but it also can do the RBAC, or the role-based access control of the app, which means you can predefine policies and rules around who can access the application, what they can do, what they can actually do with it, whether they can start and stop the app, or make it read-only, or make it just for monitoring capabilities. But also kind of gives you the ability to have audit logs for your application for any action that happens against it. So that whole ARM functionality is super powerful, both in the Azure public cloud as well as the on-prem. And then finally, for IT pros, you get a lot of what they call shadow ITing, where the people build up systems in their organizations without specific organizational approval. And what this allows you to do is kind of maintain those types of things in the Azure, using that whole command and control model for IT pros. So you get that capability for kind of different layers of the organization, and it just makes it really easy to build an app fast.
Now, I should say we have Cheebert in the chat room, so he is not dead, which is good. In fact, we have a picture of Cheebert. This is real life. That's what he looks like right now. He does say that conflicting problems are our problem, but he believes that Azure Stack has a ton of companies behind it, and thusly has a better chance. Now, we will not be bringing Cheebert onto the stream because we're afraid of giving the stream the plague, but we wish him a speedy recovery. Oh, my. Hi, I'm Cheebert. Yeah. Okay. Actually, now we have a way of bringing Cheebert in. So, Cheebert, go ahead and keep typing in the chat room, and we'll bring you in as time permits. Curtis, let's go over to you. I want to know, listening to what Lou has said about the capabilities of Azure Stack, how do I sell this? So if I go to my CTO, if I go to my CIO, let's say we've just spent a lot of money deploying to the cloud because I've promised them it's better, it's more reliable, it will allow us to decrease our development cycles. How do I now say we need to spend some extra money because we want to bring some of those back onto premise?
Well, there are a lot of customers who have started doing that. I think the biggest one is probably General Motors, which has announced over the last probably 18 months that they're bringing something like 95% of all their IT back in-house, back on premise. So you can point to someone like that and say, well, if they're doing it, obviously it's a good idea. But there are some even more serious ways to do this. And those amount to talking about flexibility, agility, and security. Now, a lot of executives loved the idea that you were going to be able to save money and buy some agility by going out into the cloud. But many of them that we've heard still had this nagging suspicion that by sending your data and, more important, your business processes into the cloud, into hardware owned by someone else, that you were losing control over a key part of your company's strategic business process. With this, you can say, you know what? We're going to take advantage of the cost savings, but we always have the option of bringing it back on premise in a very controlled, very rapid, and very low cost way. So by spending a little bit now, we buy lots of potential advantages in the future. And I think that executives know enough about buying insurance that they can see the advantages and the truth behind an argument like that.
Okay, Lou, so for the people who do make that sales pitch, now they got to bring it back on-prem. We actually do have word about the hardware that they're going to need. Can you tell us a little bit about what kind of firepower you need in order to make an Azure Stack box?
Yeah, so they seem like really beefy machines, but they're really not. Like I've seen some standard data centers have these standard machines. So I mean, the recommended, kind of like what we call the baseline, is 16-core machine, 128 gigs of RAM, one disk for the OS, roughly around 200 gigs of potentially better for SSD, but you can have a standard hard drive there, and of course then 4 disks for the other workloads. But then you can also have a smaller configuration if you want, and again, not the best experience in the world, but you'll be able to run it. And that's a 12-core machine, 96 gigs of RAM, and then the same disk configuration. So, I mean, I guess you can kind of get there. There are some standard machines today, like I know of the Dell R630 machines. They are a couple year old machines, and they can range from standard pricing from like $5,000 to $8,000 a piece. But again, a lot of data centers have those today. And of course, the HP ProLiant, the DL360 server, is also available. And these are just standard machines that people put in their data centers today.
Right. Yeah. You won't be testing Azure Stack on your desktop. You probably don't have the specs for that. But right. if you did do a migration from premise to cloud, even within the last 5 years, you probably do have a box sitting gathering dust, maybe unplugged somewhere. You could try this out. And now that it's in the test phase, and go to the Microsoft site. We're not going to do any of the links here, but go to the Microsoft site, apply for the beta program, and try it out. I'm actually going to play with this. It does look interesting. Lou, thank you very much. I mean, it's always nice to have someone who can give us sort of an in-house look at what Microsoft's coming up with. This is something I'm actually very excited by. The only thing that would excite me more than them actually dropping Azure Stack on us is them making their licensing agreements a little easier to understand. But okay, we'll get back to that. Now, folks, next up, we've got my favorite part of the show. It's when we bring our guest in. And it's a man who I don't think we've actually had on the show for over a year, Mr. Brandon Ross. He is, I'm just going to call him the Big Kahuna from Network Force Utility. He's a member of the InteropNet team. I've known him for a decade. Good man, and he's incredibly knowledgeable about everything routing. He's going to be giving us an update about IPv6, where it's going, what it's doing, what we've seen since he's last been on This Week in Enterprise Tech. But before we do that, let's go ahead and take a moment to thank the second sponsor of this episode of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Now, one of the questions that I guess get asked most often is, how do I get started in the world of IT? And there's a lot of different answers. You could be an apprentice. You could hang around network people. You could go to Interop, join the InteropNet team, and get your experience that way. But a lot of us don't have those options. A lot of us are stuck with reading dry text and applying for certification classes with no real-world activity. That's just not going to do it. Thankfully, now we have IT Pro TV. Now, IT Pro TV is a video network dedicated to the world of information technology. Whether you're looking to jumpstart a career in IT or you're already working in the field, IT Pro TV supplements traditional learning methods in a fun and engaging way that maximizes your learning and prepares you for those certification exams. IT Pro TV offers over 1,000 hours of content, and they're adding 50 hours each week. They have an extensive library covering everything from A+, CCNA, MCSA, ethical hacking, AWS, virtualization, security and cryptography, desktop and server support for OS X, Windows, and Linux, and that's just a start. The new courses right now include System Center Configuration Management with Adam Gordon and updated Certified Information Systems Security Professional videos. Now, if you're studying with a book or already enrolled in a certification or technical degree program, this is a fantastic supplement to learn at your own pace. You know that a lot of those classes aren't top-notch, and some of them don't have the best instructors. Well, with IT Pro TV, you can go over the same materials, the bits and the pieces that you don't understand. You can look exactly for the issue that you're having, the problem that you can't solve, and when you find it in their library, you can watch the video that gives you the answer. It's going to make the information stay with you, and it's just, well, it's just a better way to learn. It's a better way to learn at your own pace. It's a better way to track your progress, and it's much, much cheaper than a boot camp. IT Pro TV even includes more than 100 step-by-step virtual machine labs to give you real-world experience and transcender practice exams, $109 value. They offer a low monthly subscription rate with a no-hassle cancellation policy because they're confident that you're going to find their content compelling, relevant, and continuously useful for your IT life. Now, their client list is filled with names like Harvard, MIT, UCSD, Stanford, and with corporate and group pricing available, you really don't have a reason not to try out IT Pro TV. On a personal note, I want to congratulate Rodolfo, part of the Twit Army, who learned about IT Pro TV on the Twit TV network. Within a few months of subscribing to IT Pro TV, he had the skills, the certification, and the confidence needed to land a new job as a system admin at a better company for double the pay he was receiving. Congrats, Rodolfo. So go ahead and change your life. Get ready for IT. Check out itpro.tv/enterprise. That's itpro.tv/enterprise to upgrade your brain with the most popular IT certifications. Premium subscriptions are normally $57 a month or $570 for the year, but we have a special offer for the Twit Army. Try it free for 7 days when you sign up using our code ENTERPRISE30 to check out their courses, live stream, and more. You'll also receive 30% off the lifetime of your account. That's less than $40 per month or $399 for the entire year. That's itpro.tv/enterprise, itpro.tv/enterprise, and use the code ENTERPRISE30 to try it free for 7 days and save 30% off the life of your account. And we thank IT Pro TV for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Let's make it hot. We welcome back to the show Mr. Brandon Ross. He's the Chief Network Architect at Network Utility Force. Brandon, it is so good to have you back, my friend. How have you been?
Oh, I've been great. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks.
Now, you are located in Atlanta, and you fly all over the world. I have you on my various social feeds, and you're always checking in at some airport lounge. What has been your latest travels? What was your last job?
Well, I tend to travel more for events, and some of the other folks in the company handle more of the actual customer projects. But I did just spend a nice weekend this past weekend in the mountains of North Carolina skiing. There's some great skiing thanks to the snow that came down that probably destroyed the rest of the Northeast.
Ah, the life of a successful contractor. Hey, folks, that's why you want to do IT Pro TV, because you can end up skiing whenever you feel like it in the mountains of North Carolina. Now, Brandon, we brought you back because you are the man that both Cheebert and I go to whenever we have questions about routing, whenever we have questions about IPv6. Well, you and Jeff Enters, but that's an inside joke, just really good members of the Twit, right? But we've actually hit a milestone here, because a lot of people think of IPv6 as the new thing, but we've just hit like the 20th anniversary of the standard, have we not?
That's right. That's right. Happy anniversary or happy birthday, IPv6. The core RFC that came out that described the IPv6 protocol Came out 20 years ago on January 3rd. So we're now in our 21st year of having an IPv6 standard. Of course, the standard development process started a number of years earlier than that. But that was the first RFC published that really fully fleshed out the protocol.
Right. And I actually remember that. I was teaching at a high school in Los Angeles when the standard came out. And a lot of our audience don't remember this. They don't remember a world that the older IT people do before NAT, when this was really in the forefront, because we didn't know what NAT was. NAT did not exist. There were no 192.168 addresses or 10.10 that you could take off a link. And so we were really, really concerned that we were going to run out of IPv4 addresses like within the year. And that's when IPv6 came out. Do you remember that? What gear were you working on at that time?
Oh, I remember that. I remember that very well. I was working at the University of Florida, I believe. We had a number of routers from Wellfleet, if you believe that, if you remember them, which of course evolved to Alcatel-Lucent today, I suppose, and another company called Atlantek, also long gone. But the interesting thing about NAT is that even though we have NAT in place now that helps us preserve and extend the use of IPv4 even after we've run out of address space, it still causes a lot of problems. If you've ever been a home user trying to play a game and have to punch holes through your home router through your NAT in order to make a game work or something else like that, imagine now that as IPv4 continues to run out of address space, then not only do we have to do that at home, but also the shortage causes our upstream, our bandwidth providers to start natting our traffic too. So now we have 1, 2, 3, 4. You could have multiple NAT transitions in the path of your traffic. And if it was a pain in the butt just on your little home router at home, you imagine how much of a problem it's going to be as we go forward with IPv4 and major providers having to NAT traffic.
Yeah, natting a NAT of a NAT of a NAT is it gets interesting. It gets interesting.
Yeah, interesting is a good way to put it.
Oh, Emily the Strange in the chat room actually has it's a joke. She says, "Happy birthday IPv6. You don't look a day over never used," which I understand that, because for the longest time that was IPv6. IPv6 was always just about to be implemented. But that's not the case anymore. I mean, I would say yes, 5 years ago, but now, not only do we see dual stack devices, we're starting to see devices that are being let out into the network that don't speak IPv4 at all.
Well, I think we're a little bit premature on the don't speak IPv4 at all part, but let me throw some statistics at you. These are not my statistics. I collect these from around the web from reliable sources. So Google, for example, tracks how many hits to their various web properties are over IPv6 versus IPv4. I have the chart up. You can just plug into Google and you can find the same chart I'm looking at. And they're peaking at 10% of their hits are on IPv6. And remember, that's global. That's not just the US or the Western countries, but that's global. So across the whole world, having 10% of your traffic on IPv6 is seriously significant. There's some more statistics out there too. I flipped to another page here. So Jeff Houston, who is the chief scientist at AppNIC, the Asia. Oh, good, you found the chart from Google. Jeff Houston also has some tracking that he does. The website's potaroo.net, POTAROO.net. But anyway, he tracks the BGP tables, the global routing tables, and how much IPv6 is in use there. And if we look at just the networks that provide transit, right? So people like Level 3 and AT&T, these big carriers that carry our traffic across the world, you'll see that 66% of them are IPv6 capable. And again, this is a global statistic. So that's a lot. And anyone who tells you, hey, my enterprise or my service can't do IPv6 because my service provider doesn't support it, well, there is still some of that in some corners of the world, but for the most part, almost all of us have access to IPv6 from our upstream providers, especially in the Western world. So really, that doesn't really fit well as an excuse anymore.
Right. We've got Gadget Hog in the chat room saying that in the last week his Time Warner connection changed to IPv6 only. So I mean, we still have devices that can be dual stacked, but they're now releasing their IPv4 addresses, and Tell me if my take on this is right.
So I'm not aware of anyone doing IPv6 only. But what some providers are doing, and I don't think Time Warner's in this camp, but what some are doing is they'll give you your only public address to the internet might be IPv6, while your IPv4 addresses may be behind a NAT somewhere. So we're going to see some differentiation in the service provider space where you may end up having to pay more for a true public IPv4 address. And for probably your average grandma user, it probably doesn't matter very much. She's probably not doing anything that really requires a public IPv4 address. But if you're playing games, if you're doing any kind of high performance networking, if you want to allow inbound connections, if you're basically probably anyone watching the show, you almost certainly want a real public IPv4 address, and that's going to be harder to get. But on the other hand, at least public, IPv6 addresses are a thing. I'm sitting here in my home office. I have a Comcast connection, and my Comcast connection does native IPv6. As a matter of fact, I believe all Comcast connections today offer native IPv6. If not all, then it's a very large majority of them. So there's not this place where we were maybe a year ago when we talked where it was unusual to have IPv6 capability from your service provider. These days, it's unusual to not have it. And so the folks that are doing IPv6 only stuff, that's a different camp. I'm not aware of too many service providers, really any that'll provide like a residential or enterprise connection that's IPv6 only. But what is happening is because the cellular carriers are able to control both their network as well as the endpoints, right? If you have a cell phone like mine, you have some control over what it does, but the network side, really the carrier is controlling that. So since they can control all that, what we're starting to see is some movement towards making cell phones IPv6 only. As a matter of fact, I believe T-Mobile is doing probably a beta test, maybe of some new iOS software that is only IPv6 enabled, at least by default. Now, whether they'll actually deploy that as a production service or when, I don't know. When is eventually, but not right now. But we're starting to see some of these folks making that move. And so what I want people listening to this to think about is, if I'm an enterprise and I have services I'm offering the world and I'm only on IPv4, think of all the translations that my traffic is going to have to go through to a cell phone user who only has IPv6. There's various methods to do that, but the bottom line is native is always better and faster. And if you don't have native IPv6, you're going to be left behind.
Let me ask you about that. I want to move to IPv4 in just a bit, but when we're talking about all those translations and that native is, of course, always going to be better, when do you see us getting to that point where we can actually go native? Because, I mean, there's some pain involved there, and the translations are working, even though I'm sure we're going to discuss some of the issues that are involved with you doing 6 to 4 and 4 back to 6, et cetera, et cetera. But when do you see a point that we could finally say, no, IPv6 is now clearly the standard and IPv4 is going away?
Well, my crystal ball seems to be missing at the moment. I'll have to look for that later. But I think we're getting close to that on the 3, 4, 5 year kind of basis. And what I mean by that is that IPv6 becomes ubiquitous enough that we just assume that we have it and that it just works, and that there's only a few places that don't support it. But I could be completely wrong on that. It's really difficult to tell how far people stretch things out. And as we all know, legacy protocols don't ever really totally go away. If you look hard enough, I'm sure you can still find some DECnet and some SNA out there on the internet in various corners as well. So even probably some IPX. So, it doesn't ever totally go away, but you get that long tail effect where it becomes a small minority.
I still have ArcNet running in one of my installations.
Of course you do.
Yeah, of course. It's got to be there somewhere. Okay, now let me ask this. I think this is a great bookend here, because since the last time you were on This Week in Enterprise Tech, when we were still talking about IPv4 and address exhaustion, we actually hit IPv4 address exhaustion. It had been warned time and time again, but we finally got to the point where, no, we've handed out the last block. So let me ask you, and I don't think you need your crystal ball for this one, but has the internet ended?
Obviously, the internet is completely over. That fad has passed. So the ARIN region, right, the American Registry of Internet Numbers, their region that they administer as one of the regional internet registries, did completely run out of IPv4 addresses quite some time ago now, but yeah, between the last time I was on and now. Does that mean you can't get IPv4 addresses anymore? No, it doesn't mean that. It just means that they're going to cost you something. There's a lot of companies out there that have excess IPv4 address space, so it is acceptable to list that address space for sale. It's called a directed transfer, where you can go and create a business relationship with someone and basically buy some address space. You still have to go through a justification process, but it is available. Of course, in the European region, they've been out of address space for longer than us, as well as APNIC, right, the Asia Pacific region. They all have some different policies where there's, in some cases, there are some smaller blocks of address space that you might be able to qualify out for, especially if you're a brand new company, but for the overwhelming majority, they are out. So if you happen to be in Latin America or South America, and if you happen to be in Africa, good news, your registries do still have what we call the free pool of address space left. If you haven't asked for your address space yet, you ought to do that right now if you happen to be in those regions.
And actually, I believe we do know a person who might be able to get everyone in the Quiet Riot their own block. I think he still has a Class A. Brian, can we go to him? Hi, I'm T-Bird. I've got addresses you can all have. There, folks, you heard it here on This Week in Enterprise Tech. Just contact T-Bird at ADVNET Lab on Twitter, and he'll be happy to hand you out some IPv4 space. Okay, Brandon, let's talk about this. We briefly hinted at some of the security issues that surround not using IPv6, and actually every Black Hat and DEF CON for the last 5 years has shown some novel approaches to abusing the tunnel, the transit tunnel, in order to do bad things on the network. What are some of these security issues that you see in the real world in not using IPv6?
Yeah, so especially in the enterprise area, and especially on networks where you're trying to provide services to folks you don't necessarily trust, and that could be employees, but that is even more often, guest access kinds of networks. So a great example of that is like hotels. You go to a conference at a hotel, you go stay at a hotel, and you jump on the hotel's Wi-Fi. We all do it all the time. I haven't been in a hotel yet that actually implemented IPv6 on their Wi-Fi. There may be one or two out there somewhere, but I've not been to those hotels yet. So what I can tell you is it is trivially easy to create an attack where by jumping on the Wi-Fi, I can basically create a man-in-the-middle attack where I attract everyone's IPv6 traffic to my own device and then do whatever I want with that traffic. And why is that important? Because since the hotel hasn't implemented, in this case, IPv6, I can basically advertise myself as an IPv6 router. If they haven't specifically blocked router discovery, then since all of our laptops and other devices default IPv6, they're going to trust me as their default router, and you're going to send me all your traffic. If I'm really clever, then I create a back-end tunnel back out to the internet somewhere, and I still deliver your traffic, so you're none the wiser that I'm sitting in the middle watching all of your transactions.
How big of an industry is that for you? Because I'm assuming that one of the jobs that you can get contracted to do is to come out and check their IPv6 configuration, because you have a lot of sysadmins who have been doing this a long time, and it's working, and they don't quite understand some of the subtle differences of routing IPv6. What are the things that you have to fix? What are the things that you change and configure most often?
Yeah, absolutely. So we like to consider ourselves enlightened because we don't call out IPv6 as a specific service when it comes to a security audit. That is automatically part of what we would do if we did a security audit for a customer. Of course, if someone comes to us specifically and says, hey, I want you to look at my IPv6 configuration, we can do that as well. But in general, we do a lot of that kind of work where we go and look at people's environments and help them understand where their security risks are. That's definitely quite a big part of our business. And usually what's missed is this exact issue of, hey, I haven't deployed IPv6 yet, so I haven't paid any attention to the security issues involved. And that's where the big mistake comes in and leaves this gaping hole in a lot of people's networks that could be utilized by an attacker.
Right. I want to go ahead and bring in my co-host. They've been sitting here quietly for a while and taking in all the information that we've been getting out there. Curtis, in Information Week Radio, is IPv4, IPv6 still discussed, or is it more or less been settled for executives? They understand that they're moving to IPv6.
I think that the executives are largely out of it because they know that there is this thing called IPv6 that their networks are moving toward. They have been told about the advantages and also about the inevitability of IPv6. So for them, all they want to know is that their IT department is making the move in a way that is secure and cost effective. In other words, having been told about it, they would really like never to hear about it again.
Yeah, exactly. It's sort of like, yes, we've heard those letters and numbers put together in that configuration before. We understand it's taken care of. Just get out of my office. Lou, I realize you don't work in the operating system division. You don't work in the networking division. But is Redmond an IPv6 campus?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. I sent a little link to in the chat. There's a great site to go to that if you want to see, even some of the older products that are out there from 2007. There's Exchange 2007 in there. I mean, it'll list you kind of like what products that we allow, full support for IPv6 versus, also full support for IPv4, and CRM's in there. So there's a lot of products out there, but of course our campus definitely, we're on gigabit network across the campus using IPv6.
Right. And actually, Brandon, we briefly spoke about this when we had Cricket Lou on the show. Can you explain the DNS enhancements you get with IPv6?
Well, I mean, the DNS in a lot of ways for IPv6 specifically is really not that different. When you start including things like DNSSEC, which happened to come out exactly a year after IPv6, so that's now 19 years old, is probably a little more interesting. And people equate them together a lot because they came out around the same time. They're both technologies that are in active deployment kind of stages today. But as far as DNS itself for IPv6 specifically, it's not a whole lot. It's pretty straightforward, really.
Fantastic. All right, let me bring this down a little bit because we've been talking a lot about IPv6 and why we should be running it. And I think our audience understands that at least they need to be dual stack. In fact, we have an update from Gadget Hog in the chat room who said that his provider had gone IPv6 only. You were absolutely right. He just checked again, and it is indeed dual stacked. But I don't want to ask you to stare into your crystal ball because we know that that's not going to work really well. But as you do your consulting and as you do your security audits, from a personal note, when would you feel comfortable telling a client you don't need to find yourself an IPv4 block anymore?
It's going to be a while. It's going to be a while because too many applications and too many other services on the internet still do not support IPv6 fully. So it's going to be at least probably 8-10 years before you can go without any IPv4 at all. Now it's going to get more scarce. People are going to have to make tough decisions. And so it's going to depend on what kind of service you're offering about whether you need a public IPv4 block or whether you can survive behind a NAT. So I think that's really more the question right now is, can what you're doing, work well behind a NAT? So if you're just, again, the example of the residential user, grandma, she can be behind a NAT. It's probably no big deal. But a power user, someone doing anything interesting, you're not going to want that. You're going to want a public IPv4 address. And more importantly, you're going to want a public IPv6 address because it's going to be really hard to get that public IPv4 address.
Right.
Or it's going to get there eventually.
Brandon, I'm going to come back to you with a gray market question about IPv4 in just a bit.
I love gray market questions.
Gray market questions because you have to deal with them on a daily basis. But Curtis, for a while there, when we actually hit the exhaustion point, you had many people who were saying, well, now your IPv4 addresses are gold. They were valuable before, but now if you have a block that you can trade, not through the regular channels, they were spouting some pretty high numbers. Is IPv4 still seen as a premium resource that you could use if you need some liquidity?
I think for a company of a particular size or in a particular business, it probably is. I mean, for any organization that has 5,000 to 10,000 seats or fewer, I'm not sure it's a big deal. But if you're one of the global 500, then I am sure that as a CIO, you've had your networking folks look at it and see if you have blocks of addresses that you don't need or that you can replace with a natted scheme so that you can free some of those up and perhaps turn addresses into cash.
Indeed. Okay, Brandon, so I got to ask. Client comes up to you, says, I have XXX that need IPv4 addresses. I can't get them. What can you do for me? Obviously, they can't go to Aaron. There are no more blocks to release. We're not supposed to sell the IPv4 addresses that we've been allocated. But what would a mediator like yourself have to do in order to make that happen?
But you see, nowadays you can legitimately sell your IPv4 address space. There are policies written within each of the internet registries, including Aaron, that describe the process and what you have to do to sell your address space. Now, they still don't look at address space as an asset, although most businesses would certainly see it that way.
Right.
But it is completely legitimate. You can go out to the marketplace. You can find someone who wants to sell their address space, make a commercial deal with them, and then as long as you can still justify that address space with the registry, with Aaron, if you're here in North America, they will transfer it to you. As a matter of fact, I'm 95% of the way through a transfer of a /24 for a small startup company right now that we're helping them with. So if you're asking me what I would do is and what we do regularly is help our customers find a seller. And what you want to do is not just find a seller that you can trust, but you want to check out that address space first to make sure that it's quality, right? You don't want address space that's been previously tainted by someone who is spamming or doing some other nefarious activities, because you might be on a bunch of block lists. So you find good address space, you negotiate a price, and by the way, prices today go anywhere from $8 to $12 per IP. And then you can go to the registry and you fill out the right justification paperwork, and they will actually transfer it to you.
$8 to $12 per IP. That's actually not as bad as I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, well, not yet. You remember, there's still that bit kind of a I don't know if I'd call it a glut, but there's still a reasonable amount of inventory in the marketplace right now because we just hit Aaron run out in the last year. Now, my prediction is that price is going to go much higher before we reach the point where we don't need IPv4 anymore. I think it might even double or maybe even go up higher than that. As that excess inventory comes off the marketplace, as more and more service providers buy up that address space, as well as enterprises, but it'll be mostly service providers, that's going to push that price up.
Yeah, Cheebert may have to rent out that Class A that he's been sitting on. So we'll just have to see.
I even have one of my customers who's looking to sell a /16, a classic Class B address block, if you will. And a /16 is going for well upwards of $500,000.
That's not bad. I remember we used to have a /A and like 6 Class Bs.
45/8 used to be owned by the InteropNet. InteropNet graciously returned most of that address,
which you're supposed to do. That's what it was to be a good net citizen.
Yeah, and I think it was the right thing to do because that address block was never really intended specifically for Interop. It was meant as a network for various trade shows to use throughout time, and it has been used that way over time. But so Interop downsized our address block to something much smaller. I think it's a /15 and or a /14 and a few /16s today, which I realize is still a lot more address space than kind of your average company out there. But considering it was a /8 before that, I think we did the right thing.
And I have to say, there's always been a policy among the people of internet that you could borrow a couple of blocks if you needed to, and you've been very, very helpful with getting those routes out there. So we still have that available to us. That is a fantastic resource. So if you do need some IPv4 address space, come talk to me. We'll talk. Gentlemen, thank you very much. Unfortunately, our audience has spent another hour listening to the best dang enterprise show in the universe. That's according to 9 out of 10 routes. I want to thank our panelists for being here, starting with you, Brandon. It's always a pleasure to speak with you. I love to actually meet you. Will you be in Vegas? I know details are a little sketchy right now, but are you heading out Vegas at all in May?
I do not currently have plans to be in Vegas, but that could change. Actually, I need to go see my family out there anyway. But I may be there anyway. We'll see. The next opportunity I'll be out on your coast, though, is just in a couple weeks at the North American Network Operators Group meeting, which the next one is in San Diego. So I'll be in San Diego in a couple weeks for that. And then, we'll see what happens in May.
Well, we got to meet up because I miss you and I owe you a dinner and a beer.
Miss you too. Yeah. I owe you a jug.
Yeah. Okay. 2. Actually, here's your plug space. Could you please tell us about Network Utility Force? Tell us about your position. Tell us about where they can go if they want to find your services, specifically if they're looking for help with routing IPv6, IPv4
Absolutely, absolutely. So thank you for the opportunity. So Network Utility Force is a professional services organization. We focus on network infrastructure. So anything network infrastructure we can help you with, everything from obviously IPv6, but core routing and switching, like you mentioned. We also do a lot of wireless work, both Wi-Fi and point-to-point work. And we have a new, not new, but a focus this year on network security, virtualization, and storage. So we have a whole group that's dedicated to that now, and so we can build really anything in the infrastructure side that just about anybody can need.
Again, that is Brandon Ross. He is the Chief Network Architect of Network Utility Force. If you are looking for someone with expertise, if you have a project involving IPv6, IPv4, if you're looking for the routing expert that Interop goes to configure our routes, then you're going to want to check them out. Brandon, again, thank you for being on This Week in Enterprise Tech.
Thank you for having me, as always.
And, of course, we need to thank our co-hosts. Let's start with Curtis, because, Curtis, you always go second to Cheebert. And so whenever we can pull you first, that's always a good thing. Could you tell us what you're up to, what the folks can expect to find on Information Week Radio this week?
Well, it's interesting because this week we actually started talking about the Information Week Elite 100 Conference, which is something that happens at the same time as the beginning of Interop. So May 2nd and 3rd, we'll be highlighting the companies that have been awarded the Information Week Elite 100 label and the people who are the companies that are the elite among the elite. We're going to be highlighting those all the way through until the conference and providing much more information. So be on the lookout and on the listen for that at Information Week Radio.
Curtis Franklin, always a pleasure. And, of course, thanks to the newest member of our host team, Mr. Lou Maresca, again, a senior lead over at Microsoft. Lou, thank you for stepping in for Cheebert. We have it in the chat room that he's not dying, so he should be back with us. We'll have to figure out what this does to the rotation, but could you please tell the folks at home where they can find you, where they can find your place in Microsoft, and what you're up to?
Absolutely. So you can always find me on Twitter at LouMM. And, of course, all my work at Microsoft is always found at crm.dynamics.com.
Thank you very much. Folks, I also want to thank everyone here who makes this show possible. Of course, that means Lisa and Leo. That means Carson, my super producer. And, of course, to you, the people who stop by each and every single week. Without you, we wouldn't have This Week in Enterprise Tech. Without you downloading the show, we wouldn't have an audience. So we want to make it easier for you to get our show into any device that you want. Just go to our show page at twit.tv/Twyatt. There you'll find not just all of our episodes in any format that you want, but you'll also find drop-down menus so you can subscribe. Do you want the audio version in your iPhone so that you can listen to us on the way to work? You can do that. Do you want the video version on your Android tablet so you can watch us on your break time? You can do that. Do you want the high-definition version in your PC, your Mac, your laptop, your desktop so you can watch us in high def at home? Well, you can do that. Oh, and by the way, if you're listening to us right now, you do need to download the video version to find out what we were doing with Cheebert. It's disturbing. Also, don't forget you can follow me on Twitter at twitter.com/PadreSJ. If you follow me, you'll find out what we're going to be doing each and every single week. And more importantly, you'll be able to suggest guests and topics for future shows. That is the best way to get a hold of me. Again, twitter.com/PadreSJ. Don't forget that we do the show live every Friday at 1:30 p.m. Pacific time. Just go to live.twit.tv. You can see the pre-show, the post-show, everything in between, all the bloopers that we take out. It's part of the experiment that is Twit TV. And as long as you're experimenting, drop into our chat room at irc.twit.tv. I've got a little screen right below here so that I can see what you type. I can converse with you during the show, and I can bring your input to our guests. Again, it's all part of being the Twit Army. Finally, don't forget that we've got a newsletter at Twit TV. Just go to twit.tv/newsletter, subscribe, and you'll be able to find all the behind-the-scenes information, what makes the Brick House the Brick House. I think one last thank you is due here because for the last few weeks we've been missing a big member of the team. and he's now back. It's Cranky Hippo, Brian Burnett. Brian.
It wasn't that long, was it?
It feels like a long time because, you know, a day without Hippo is just a day wasted.
Wow, you know, you say a lot nicer things on air than you do when I see you off air.
I'm not sure why that happens. It's just weird.
It's strange, but we do a show together.
We do, yes.
We're going to be doing that later today called Know How. 2 episodes. Are we going to do those on the stream?
I don't know.
I don't know. We'll see. We'll see how we feel, you know, really.
I'll do what I want.
But it's good to be back. I was very near Chibert. I was in Kauai for a week, and it was awesome. But good to be back.
Yeah, indeed. Folks, that does it for this episode of This Week in Enterprise Tech. I'm Father Robert Ballecer, the Digital Jesuit, just reminding you that if you want to know what's going on in the Enterprise, just keep quiet.